Well, hello everyone. I'm Andrew McLean. I have the role as chair of this stream, and sorry, there's been a bit of confusion at the start, a bit of duplication of effort, but I think we've sorted that out now. We've got a panel now on international Landcare. I'm not going to say very much here because I'm conscious of time, and I'm going to hand over to the redoubtable Andrew Campbell to run the show. Phones off is my message here. It's underlined, so if you haven't already done it, this is a good time. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew. Apologies, everyone, for being late here. But yeah, this session's about helping Australian land carers to understand some of the international land care activities that are happening. And it's fantastic that we've got some people who've been involved not just in doing that work, but in doing research on it too. So my name's Andrew Campbell, and I'm the Chief Executive of the Centre for International Agricultural Research, ACR. I report direct to the Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, and we invest Australian aid funds in science partnerships across our region for food security and better natural resource management, better biosecurity, and so on. And particularly in recent decades, we've been funding not just the traditional biophysical and agricultural production science, but we've also been funding social research and understanding the people dimensions of the challenges we face. And in that work, we've been supporting Australian researchers to look in partnership with researchers from other countries at how communities are responding to their challenges and so on. And some of that has inevitably infused some of our work overseas with land care experiences from Australia that have then been reinterpreted and adapted to international contexts, and we're going to hear a little bit about that today. But I haven't got this email yet, Clinton, so if you can just tell me who was supposed to be up first.
We might start with Andrea and Rob.
Fantastic. So we're going to hear about global land care with Andrea and Rob very quickly, and then Mary Johnson from RMIT, who's been leading some of this land care research funded by ACR with Clinton, and Shang Fuentes from the Philippines, who's a PhD student but also a land care practitioner in the Philippines, and she's an ACR Merrill Williams Fellow. So that's a new women's leadership program that we're funding across the region. So over to you, Andrea and Rob, to get us going.
Okay. Hopefully I can do this. Thank you, and I've got to work out how to work this one now. That's Andrew. No. Is this the right one?
That's it.
Yeah. Where's the next slide?
Just go back, Andrea. You might need to click on the names. I think there's a touch screen.
Oh, is it?
Just slide back.
Yeah, slide before that.
Sorry,
Yep, and then
guys.
touch your name.
Touch the name.
Which name? Mine?
Your name, yeah.
Or not?
There.
It's not what I saw downstairs before. Hi guys, I'm going to need some help here, please. That's Pamela, that's not now.
Thanks, Pamela. No.
We've got a series of slides here that I'll get to you very quickly. So
Push on
Here.
the name on the screen. Or try pushing
They're
on
not
Rob's
hot.
name. Push on land care impact and see whether that
Yeah.
makes a difference.
it's not reacting.
What about that little button to the right?
Can you guys up the back at your panel help us?
Have a
Righto.
look.
Anyway,
All right, well,
get
I
us.
can yeah, I'm Andrea Mason. I'm Chair of Global Landcare. I'm not sure how many of you were at the welcome drinks last night, so for those who were, well, there'll be a little bit of repetition, but we'll keep it short. I do want to, we had Welcome to Country this morning. We're on Gadigal lands, but as a global organisation, we like to pay our respects. I know that there are people watching from across the globe on the online platform. So we like to pay our respects to elders past, present, emerging in all the countries in which we work, collaborate and meet. So thank you for that. International Landcare was once the domain of 3 organisations: Landcare International, which was based in Nairobi, Secretariat of International Landcare, of which Mary was a founding member, and the Australian Landcare International, which Rob was a founding member. There were 3 organisations. This session talks about, we came together at a conference in Nagoya in November 2017, the first International Landcare Studies Conference, first and only conference, based on the need to talk about the role of Landcare in crisis situations and self-reliance, and how successful it's been across the globe. There were 65 delegates that attended that conference from across 11 nations. So the 3 organisations that have been working in International Landcare have been working for over 15, almost 20 years. In past, many of you who are rusted on like me in Australian Landcare will remember seeing Africans and people from right across the world coming to Landcare conferences in Australia to learn about the Landcare approach. So in Global Landcare, we talk about the Landcare approach. I personally am a big proponent for the Landcare brand, and the Global Landcare brand will be something that we'll be pushing. But it was incredibly encouraging, and one of the resolutions from that conference was that 3 organisations was not a good way for us to progress in across the globe, and that we needed a single entity. So in October 2020, we successfully merged the 3 organisations and created Global Landcare. So while Global Landcare itself is a fledgling organisation, those of you who knew Australian Landcare International, we've given papers at conferences before. We are now a new organisation. We have a board of 17, not representative, but representative from across the globe. And we're still kind of finding our way. Have we got slides yet? Really tricky.
No, right.
No.
Okay. Well,
Maybe not.
We might need to move on to lessons.
Yeah. So, so last night and the night before we launched this book, and some of you will have seen it. Some of you will have missed out on picking up a copy.
There's plenty more at the ACR stand.
There's plenty more at the ACR stand. They're free. They were funded through ACR, government organisation, so they can't be sold. They are now available online, and you can order a hard copy or a copy online from the ACR website. So that was the main thing. The beautiful thing about this book and where Global Landcare is going now is that it was all about the word subsidiarity and grassroots action, which is very successfully demonstrated in many countries across the globe. Now, we're going to hear from some of them with the next speakers. For me, as a practitioner of Landcare, the best part about this book is it is a blend of scientific papers and practitioner stories. It's a scientific paper. We needed a scientific paper to show to government, to show to key organisations that Landcare is serious. We sort of haven't had enough of those pieces of work to say, we all know Landcare works, how do we prove it? So this is going to be a major piece for moving forward for Australian Landcare and Global Landcare. And for global Landcare, using the lessons from this and reaching out into the next stages of what we want to do, which is, you know, talking, I don't know, you get caught up in COVID, we get a bit disjointed, but already in this conference and talking to people on that, the opportunities for global Landcare, the opportunities to introduce subsidiarity into aid programs and other research programs and global Landcare programs across the thing is enormous. And I'm a bit overwhelmed at the moment of the amount of work we've got to do. So
Thanks, Andrea.
thank you. And for those of you on Twitter, we're on @GlobalLandcare.
Okay, thanks, Andrea. Can we try and click forward? Sure.
No, they're next session.
No, that's, yeah, all we're getting is the titles of the sessions, which isn't helpful. Okay. So let's go on to Mary, Dr. Mary Johnson from...
Sorry,
Dr. Mary Johnson from RMIT University has been researching this area for a long time. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, Andrew. In lieu of a splendid slideshow, I'd like to share some of the observations of recent research that has been funded by ACR in the Philippines. And it was research around the development of a new extension model that became known as livelihood improvement through facilitated extension. And I really... Life. That's right. And I really stress the word facilitated extension. This model was developed with conflict vulnerable communities in Mindanao in the southern part of the Philippines. Over 2,000 farmers took part at 26 sites, multiple partners from farmer groups, farmers and communities, through to research organisations, universities, local government, departments of agriculture, and right to a very national level. The reason for looking at a new way of doing extension was that we'd known from lessons from the past that old ways of extension, the normal was technology transfer, in fact, imparting knowledge to farmers. The life model comes in with a different view and is very based on lessons that had come out of Landcare. And it was about collective learning, and I know that Mark referred to social learning this morning, but the collection of people coming together to help solve problems, because the complexities that farmers and governments and civil societies are facing today are so complex that we individually can't do this by ourselves. So, we had a wonderful team of Philippine researchers and field officers through the Landcare Foundation of the Philippines and the University of the Philippines, Mindanao. There were 3 Australians involved, and we counterparted with our...
I think you might have your slides now.
Oh, okay. Well, if I just click...
Oh, lucky you.
Okay,
Mary, I'm
so there we
controlling
go. So we counterparted with multiple partners to develop this new life model. Excellent, I'll have to look at it this way. So, it's going really quickly. So the life model was informed by Landcare lessons, and that was people-centred lessons in collaboration with other partners. It's been picked up by at local level by barangay councils or local village councils and government agencies. And local government in the Philippines is really important because they deliver a lot of national programs. So the extension processes are delivered by local government from the national government and regional governments. It was also adopted and adapted through regional government level and right up to national government. But what was important about it was it integrated technical, social and policy imperatives. It brought these together using 3 concurrent strategies, and that was to impart technical or training to farmer communities through farmer groups, very important, building community social capital, and also collaborating closely with local institutional partners for sustainable partnerships. So just quickly, impacts across this project. This project's up on the web and I can give you details later. But the participation of farmers, because it was centred on farmer group decision making, the participation rates were relatively high in comparison to other models. And from 45 to 100% across all the groups that we worked with, and mostly exceeded that 80%. In terms of income, because it was income focused, 10 to 20% increase in farmers' annual income from tree nurseries, could be fruit trees for food or timber trees. 20 to 69% increase in farmers' annual income from vegetable growing. And a lot of the smallholder farmers had monocultures. So they were either growing just maize or just pillay and rice, but in working through this project with teams of people to help them inform their decision making, they chose vegetables because it was a meal on the table at night and it gave them a meal in their kids' lunch boxes the next day going to school, and it gave them income so that they could do more. 5 major institutional partners were involved in the scaling out or as the organic spread of the extension project as it was going along. So there were positive changes in the attitudes of local and extension through the local governments, and bearing in mind this occurred in conflict setting, so there'd been a lot of distrust and a lot of disengagement between the farmer groups and the people who could help them. Farmer groups had got to a point over 8 years of being very confident, robust groups, and they were informing planning and development processes of local government. And there was a clear correlation between capital and economic welfare, social capital and economic welfare in the studies that we made. So, importantly, I've picked this out too, that women played a vital role in building social capital. And then women's role is not always acknowledged, but acknowledged at local level for being negotiators, mediators and advisors in conflict resolution. We also found that the women's groups and in fact community groups were doing a lot of home gardening, and this became really significant through COVID and the pandemic because there were critical food shortages. In fact, they were growing food in excess so that could, where possible, be delivered to other communities. Okay, so the principles of Landcare Life, which have come from Landcare, we see them as being universal because this life has been tested and adopted and adapted by others. For example, the Department of Social Welfare and Development, at national level through investment by Pickard and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. It's been successfully trialled by civil society organisations such as the Consortium of Bangsamoro's Civil Societies. Training's been rolled out through Mindanao, and there's a new ACR-funded project which has started in Fiji for the adaptation. I don't say adoption, we say the adaptation of these things because things evolve. So 2 more slides to go. Final observations. Community-centred, and I could easily say people-centred, place-based, people-centred local, place-based extension models such as LIFE provide, and I've used the word mechanism, but understanding would be better. They provide the understanding of the social, cultural, economic, political and environmental conditions which help us to understand the relationships and the interconnections between people and place. And that is so important. We've heard a lot about this in this conference. Last slide. And also, based on the Mindanao experience of quick uptake, we believe that this model of extension could be used in disaster planning, mitigation and recovery. And again, the emphasis on the correlation between social capital and economic welfare, and this supports the principle of agricultural extension with a strong focus on the social capital element, ensures the convergence between these outcomes. So thank you.
Thanks, Mary. And I think we're going to hear about that extension into Fiji through Shang. So
I'll talk about
over to you. Oh, you're talking about the Philippines?
Philippines, yes.
But, well, can you mention Fiji too?
Sure. And Clinton, I reckon, will do that.
Huh? Oh, that's Clinton's job.
Clinton, okay. Thank you so much, Andrew. It's an honor, really, to be sitting with this really experienced panel. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land here, as well as the indigenous people and the non-Moro indigenous people we work with in the Philippines for since 2013, Mary. No? So what I'll be sharing with you today is I'll focus on one thing, the sustainability mechanisms, because I reckon that would be, I think that would allow us to see what has been in place there. And it would be good to know, because most projects, after they finish, nothing happens, right, after. But I'd like you to show that, look, there's hope, as Pam earlier was talking about. And I think, this is where critical hope really, really helps, because you get to see that things can actually happen and continue to happen in these places. So I'll talk about sustainability at 3 different levels: at the institutional, at the group level, as well as the individual level. So for institutional level, Mary actually mentioned already some of the ordinance, some of the things that have been institutionalized. Like, for example, Life Model has been supported by the national government agency, which is the counterpart of ACR in the Philippines, the Philippine Council for Agriculture, Aquatic, and Natural Resources for Research and Development, or PICARD. And along with that, when we look at the local government units, we do see institutionalization as well in terms of the ordinances that have been passed. So I'll show you one of these ordinances. And then the embedding of the Life Model in programs. I'm not saying all of those areas, but in some of these areas, like some in Maguindanao, Zamboanga, Sibugay, and South Cotabato, they have already started embedding the Life Model in their programs. And as a result of that, they have corresponding budgets, which we know, again, it cannot just be all talk. There has to be a corresponding budget to make things happen. Now, along with that, they have also replicated the model in different communities, as Mary mentioned, the different barangays, village level implementation of this. Now, at the group level, we also see that they are registered and active. So it's good to see that, they're not just there in name, but they're also really active organizations. I'll show you photos soon after this. And then there's group savings. The group themselves, farmer groups themselves have their own group savings. And then they are represented in local development councils, which means that they do have a voice that can be heard in terms of affecting policy and decision-making in their local communities. They also are, they have implemented their own savings at the individual level. So before, they only have credit. They owe a lot of credit especially to the financiers who loan them money for their farm inputs. And then there's capacity built in terms of enhanced training, and I reckon this is very important in an area that's conflict-ridden, because people get displaced all the time. So wherever they go, they bring that with them. This knowledge, these skills that they've learned through the training, they're bringing it with them. And then Yes, they also have diversified livelihood now, whereas as Mary mentioned, they used to do monocropping, like planting corn, which earned them a lot of credit. So now they do have that. I promised Andrew to dazzle you with photos. So this is one example of the local ordinance, a really good one, because this is about the barter, the exchange between the coastal communities' rubbish with that of the fertilizer, organic fertilizer provided by the municipal environment. So you're saving both. You're saving the environment, you're also providing more input for farmers for their livelihood.
So they get to swap their waste
They
for
do,
fertiliser.
yes. That's the ordinance that we helped came up with in 2020. And if you notice, this is like first ordinance for that year.
Fantastic. Ordinance number 1.
Yes. So, okay, next slide, please. Okay. And as mentioned by Mary, we used to just have 26, and now it has really scaled out. So even the Gender and Development Program is being used to fund the life model in these local government units. And then, oh, sorry. Right, so as I mentioned, they're active associations, so they're not just associations. 2 of them actually moved on to become cooperatives now. So it's a really good, seeing that. And they've celebrated their happy 7th anniversary. Right. And then savings, as I mentioned, so there's group savings, which really helped them during the pandemic. They were able to take on loans in their own organization because they've got their own savings. It started out with just this lockup, thing, but now it's in the banks. Almost done. Then diversified livelihood. I had the truck because I'd like you to see that it used to be just a pipe dream for them, but now they have it. They just acquired it last year.
Their own truck.
They have their own truck. So it's, and they've diversified, not just vegetables, but they're into production as well of processing their raw produce, which we know would add value to, And finally, yes, last slide. This results into improved communities. Yes, so it really has a ripple effect, if you like, in the different areas of their community. So now they're setting up, for example, a museum. The local government there is going to set up a museum. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Shang. So this work that you've seen is ODA funded, meaning it's funded through the Australian aid program, and you can see why even the previous president of the Philippines, President Duterte, is not necessarily a fan of foreign aid, loved this work because he comes from that area and understands the difficult post-conflict context in which this work is taking place, and so he actually loved ACR's work in the Philippines, and hopefully that political support will continue. So, Clinton, over to you, talking about broader impacts.
Cheers, Andrew. If we might hit the next slide. Mary touched on earlier that it's nice to have some legacy and some sustainability around projects like this. So we've learned a lot around what has been explored over the 8-year AMAP project in the Philippines, and it's nice to continue and scale that out. So certainly we're very excited about a new investment that ACR has supported as a very strong partner and collaborator to take the lessons from the Landcare Life project in the Philippines and explore how we might adapt that in another country context. And we're certainly looking at Fiji here. So we're very excited about that opportunity, as Mary said, not to adopt at all by any stretch, but more adapt. What are the lessons? What are the current infrastructure that's happening within a Fijian context? And how do we share some of those lessons more from a tripartite perspective, not just Australia taking a messaging, but more brokering what has happened and occurred in the Philippines, and how do we share that in the context of Fiji? So we're looking at 3 sites here. I'm not sure if anyone's jumped on a plane to escape some of this cooler weather during winter, but we have 3 great locations across the country of Fiji, one in Sigatoka, one on Taveuni Island, and there's been some great connection over the year over soil health projects there, and certainly in the northern region of Labasa as well. So if we look at this particular project, and I'm going to point out and acknowledge that we're very, very fortunate and last minute to have a couple of our project partners here at the conference in person as well. So ACI have certainly been very supportive through their launch fund to enable us to be attended by our project manager, Aloisi, who's hosted by FNU. So Aloisi, for those in the crowd today, raise your hand and stand up. And one of our other core partners from the Ministry of Agriculture, Solomoni. So Solomoni, wave your hand up in the back there for those in the room here today. And I will point out, this is not to pick on Solo, but I've got a few photos of Solo around the grog bowl or the carver bowl. And I think this is a really important aspect of Landcare and its evolution about the people-centred aspect of it. And I think this is a big celebration where we come together as a community and we share and celebrate our stories. So this is a really great example of networking within the Fijian context that we quite enjoy, Mary. So I wanted to share what we're looking at through this particular project. And the project certainly aims to enhance that community level decision making. And I think one of the beauties we see in a country like Fiji is so rich in social capital already. There are wonderful institutions, be they faith-based, sports-based with the rugby, or the existing infrastructure that exists within a village level. So we're working within some great infrastructure already. We're also looking, though, at the feedback mechanisms that exist. And I think these are some of the aspects from the life model that has evolved in the Philippines and many of our own shared lessons domestically here in Australia about a Landcare approach, about how we can look at that strengthening of those extension systems and that interaction. And a big part of that is the partnerships. And I find it so encouraging to come back to a Landcare conference and see stages full of academics, of farmers, of government officials, of practitioners, employed staff, volunteer, and that parity in the relationship, that we're all equal and we're all representing and our voices are heard. And I think that aspect of true and active partnerships is a really strong element that's coming forward within this new program. We're also supporting on-ground works. So I think one of the things we talk a lot about Landcare and why is it different is that process aspect of it being about people. But we've got to recognise that connection to land and country, or in Fiji has a wonderful concept of the vanua. But certainly how do we undertake these biophysical actions on ground? And they're varied, they're very place-based, they're very contextual based on that situation. That's one of the real strengths we have with the Landcare approach. And finally, we're not just looking at this from a domestic perspective, we're looking at what are the regional partnerships. And it's wonderful to have partners like Shang and others within the Philippines and the context and the wealth of experience that they bring through going through that journey themselves to share within our partners in Fiji. So it's a very privileged opportunity to be able to broker those relationships. And when I talk about those relationships, and I'm sorry, Mary, I'm putting your carver drinking on display here, but certainly we really focus on these relational extension models. And I quite like how we've mapped out our project partners for this project. We've got the funding and the agricultural R&D, and certainly fantastic to have ACI support for this, but also to acknowledge PICARD, the Philippines research agency, and their willingness to invest in this project as well to explore the journey and for shared lessons back to the Philippines. We've also got our research partners led by RMIT University, but strongly also Fiji National University, and Aloisi's here representing FNU today. But also our partners back in the Philippines as well. So Shang from UP Mindanao and then UP Los Banos as well, very strong core research that's coming into play. Our operational, so Ministry of Agriculture with Solomoni and the team there at sites, but we also have a farmer community as well who are leading one of our sites in Taveuni, Tay Farmers Association. And Alan and the team there are doing a fantastic job from a grassroots perspective. So it's a really important opportunity to look at contextually place-based, who's the appropriate agencies to be delivering the activities. And finally, the capacity, and great to have Global Landcare here on the stage and their support, and equally Landcare Foundation of the Philippines, and who've been a very strong advocate for the program in the Philippines for several years now. What we really love about this opportunity too is to look at the changing structure of the works as well. And this is one of the big lessons from the Philippines project as well, is that where farmers become researchers themselves and researchers are becoming applied in their practices, and we're all in this together from a partnership perspective. And so finally, and I think this is a point that was touched on earlier today, was that the wheel has already been invented. It's certainly really important that we don't reinvent that. And this is one of the beauties of a program like applying the LIFE model or a Landcare approach in the Fiji, is that a lot of the institutional infrastructure is already built. So here's a photo of the Galilanga Landcare group in Labasa. They celebrate. Look at the uniforms, look at the trophies, they have Farmer of the Year awards. They're already strong and functioning Landcare group. What we hope to explore through this project is certainly how do we strengthen that? How do we apply the lessons of strong partnerships and networks and collaborations? So it's certainly important as we deliver projects like this, we recognise the value of the existing institutional infrastructure, the networks that are already in place, and how do we work within that framework for the complementarity that the Landcare model delivers to support other development outcomes as well. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, panel. We do have time for some questions from the floor. I can assure you, I think it'll be very, very hard for you to get out without hearing from Rob at some stage. But yes, we got some questions. I'm not sure how I can get questions from online, but there's a mic up the back, so sing out. Very happy to take any. Yes.
I have a question. Thanks, guys. I think that was really interesting to see how you are taking Mary and Shane, what's been learned.
Use the mic. Yeah, yeah.
What's been learned in the Philippines and applying that in Fiji. So I guess that while listening to you, I've been reflecting on the fact that I started working in community development.
Now it's working. Yeah.
Started working in community development in South Africa under apartheid in 1983, and it's very interesting to me to see the work of people like, I'm thinking like Patrick van Rensburg, who was working in Botswana in the 70s and 80s, Sally Hope and Timmel, who did training for transformation in Zimbabwe in the late 70s, to see these ideas now, thank you, coming around again. And someone texted me this morning in that session in the ballroom, everything old is new again. And I'm just really interested, Andrew, to hear your perspective on this, because you've been around the traps and apparently you're the DNA. So I'm really interested to hear how we apply this to the sort of challenges that we face. So let's take the Solomon Islands as an example. When we talk about building relationships and building partnerships, how we do that in a way that really shows that we do care and that we want to see that change happening.
Well, like I take the point, I agree. We're not inventing community development. There's a vast literature on that, and it's been around for a long time. But these guys are tapping into that, and what we're seeing here is some, to use the jargon, some south-south work with the Philippines, helping Fiji and learning both ways. We hope that the lessons coming out of this will inform future work in other Pacific Island countries and in other Southeast Asian countries. Potentially, I think there's scope for the broader aid program to incorporate these same principles and institutionalise it even further. So beyond the ACR research for development so we spend 2% of the aid budget, DFAT spends 98%. It'd be great that the bigger chunk of the pie was investing in this sort of work too. And I think there's a very good chance of that just because of the sorts of results that are being achieved. And, it's my aim to get Penny Wong out to see some of this work on the ground. And I think if I can achieve that, might find that it spreads a fair bit quicker.
Can I just add to that?
Yes, Mary.
If you don't mind. I guess the other thing is that we've come very much from an agricultural extension point of view, livelihood improvement. And it's the nexus where research, agricultural extension research and community development have sort of come together. Now, I'm not so sure that there's been a lot of that happen in the past. Certainly a lot of community development, but from an agricultural extension point of view, that's been the basis. And it's also incorporated the Landcare learnings, which brought not only agricultural production or livelihood improvement, but in the framework of a conservation framework. So it's a triumvirate of three different things that are coming together and very much based on the social.
There's another factor we haven't mentioned, and that is the COVID impact. We did a comprehensive assessment of COVID impacts on food systems across the Pacific and Southeast Asia. And one of the things that was a little bit surprising that came out of that was that agriculture has been an amazing shock absorber for these communities through COVID, because so many people lost their jobs in the cities and went home to their village, and they got back involved in food production. And just as supply chains were sort of breaking down, in fact, local food production was recovering, and that's been a really useful thing to come out, that countries are now thinking about, okay, how do we optimise the supply chain? There are some things where we want shorter supply chains. You don't want to be waiting for the barge to turn up for some of the most critical things if you can grow them yourself, including fertiliser. And so those sorts of things, I think there's an interesting confluence here between what we've learnt during COVID and these bottom-up approaches that build more self-reliance locally. That's exactly what people have needed to get through COVID, and I think coming out the other side, hopefully some of this will be more institutionalised.
Yeah.
Clinton.
Can I just make a quick comment on that one as well? So Pamela, thanks for sharing that observation as well. I just wanted to share an earlier study that Mary and I were involved in as a precursor for the Fiji work to explore that a little bit further. There's an interesting dimension to that as well about the community itself. So it was necessary to have a need, a want or a will for change. And I think certainly that combination of that elements creates an ideal environment for decision making and empowerment at a grassroots level. And furthermore, some of the more successful examples that we saw of how Landcare has expressed itself in other countries is that sustainability of the practice change. So rather than a program coming in from a top-down perspective or a technology transfer to say, thou shalt adopt this practice, it's more around, crap, we've got a problem here, we're in big challenge right now, how do we collectively address that? And in doing so, creates that ownership of the practice change going forward. So I think certainly that sustainability and linked into a community development framework as well is also an important element.
Okay.
Rob, did you want to add something?
Very quickly, yes, all of us here have been involved in the history of overseas Landcare, and it's delightful to reminisce and very interesting. But one piece of history I'll pluck out of the air. We managed to get the group that formed maybe 15 years ago in central Java. We managed to get them to Mindanao with an Australian guide, and so the two groups could look at each other. They had different cultivation techniques. In central Java, they cultivate like that, and the water drains downhill accordingly, and everything was on the contour in Mindanao. So, and just perhaps let's look forward from now on. The history is fascinating. Andrew and I went to the Caribbean with our spouses a couple of times. But we're here, and the challenges have been outlined by Mark so superbly, and we've now got to look at how and we've got online audience, and there's yourselves, how do we marshal the resources and the organisations we've got, and do we really make a difference in the future? And so I reckon let's keep the questions and comments to forward. And the future's difficult, but there are some really positive things, and we can just feel. Those of us who've been in a long time, we can feel it happening right now. So you're all part of it.
Thanks, Rob. One last question down here before we have to go to lunch.
That's all positive, and I think it's great. It seems to be sort of where Australia has some influence with trade budgets and things. How do we get the Landcare ethic and the life ideas out beyond, the Pacific to other parts of the world? Because this is a problem all over the world. We need to get this sort of ideas out. So how do we get that out?
Well, part of the answer is that if that sort of an extension model works for people, then we'll see that it organically starts to spread out. And we're seeing that in the Philippines. Well and truly, the project was finished last year, but it continues on, and the spread continues on. So where extension models, for example, or where Landcare and Life have meaning for people, then I see that will be adopted with support from the institutional services, whether it be government or others, whether it's education, whether it's research. As more and more information gets out and is spread throughout, then people can make a call on whether they want to extend or not.
The bottom line is, if they don't know about it, how can they ask for it? We need to get the word out beyond our sort of sphere of influence.
So I'd like to suggest that you all keep continuing to follow global Landcare, because that's a key part of what our role will be. It's interesting that these examples that we've seen today really come back to how Landcare in Australia started. You know, it came out of a need, and an urgent need at the time, and it spread like wildfire across farm fences. Pretty much, it was peer-to-peer, word-to-word, all those sort of things, and so quickly. And in the countries and the examples where it's been successful, like Uganda, like Philippines, like Iceland, like South Africa, and that is because people are there with the need, and they've embraced it and seen it. And if you heard Kaz, I think, speaking before, it's not always every country or every community that can or has or will just follow and embrace this. There's a community development, there's people doing grassroots stuff all over the world, but some cultures are a bit resistant to that, so you know, it may take longer for this to go along. But you know, if you've got community people embracing this and doing exciting projects, and you can get the government people, like in Uganda, like in Philippines, and that to say, "Wow, this is exciting," then all we just need to keep spreading the word. These days, social media, technology, those sort of things are a great way to spread the word. So.
Thanks, Andrea. Look, I'm afraid we've hit lunchtime.
That was quick.
Thank you very much, everybody, for joining this session. I'll just remind you, if you want to find more about the global stuff, this book is available for free at the ACR stand.
And online.
And obviously you can download soft copies for nothing and order it online as well. But thank you very much for coming to this session.
Thank you.